Alright, let's get ready to cast on the 1111 mittens. I have my yarn here, my main color and my contrast color, my needles, both 4.5 millimeter and 3.25 millimeter, scissors, stitch marker, and a measuring tape and darning needle will come in handy too. So first a note about the colors. I have this pair with the solid color and the variegated yarn, and then I have this other pair with two variegated yarns, and I also swapped the main color and the contrast color for this pair. So just a couple ideas for you. You could also of course do a variegated color as the main color and then a solid color as the contrast color. Either way, you should know that your main color is going to be this color on the bigger stripes around the edges, and that will also be the color of the I-cord bow if you choose to include it. Okay, so I'll start by casting on with the larger needles, the 4.5 millimeter US 7 needles. I'm going to use a German twisted cast on, and I can link to a German twisted cast on tutorial in the description if you don't know how to do it already. Alright, now that I've cast on all my stitches, I'm going to switch to my smaller needles. Alright, now I'm ready to join in the round. I've got my magic loop set up, and I'm going to insert the beginning of round stitch marker and then knit 1, purl 1 to beginning of round. Alright, that's round 1 done, and we're going to repeat that until the facing is the length indicated in the pattern. But to start, I have this huge gap right here, and what I need to do first is to move the gap in my needles and my magic loop somewhere else. So I'm going to start by knitting one, and what I'm going to do to fix that gap is I'm going to use my tail from when I started and weave it in as I go, and that's going to help me tighten up that gap. So how I weave it in is I insert my needle, wrap the tail knitwise, wrap the yarn knitwise, and then unwrap the tail. Alright, and then I'll purl this one. And now when I knit, I'm going to do that again. So wrap the tail counterclockwise, wrap the yarn counterclockwise, and then unwrap the tail clockwise and finish knitting that stitch. That weaves in the tail along the back edge, and then I can pull on the tail and get myself a little more friction to close up that gap. What I'm also going to do is just let those 3 stitches slip onto the other side of the needle. I'm on a purl, knit again, wrapping the tail, wrapping the yarn, unwrapping the tail, completing the stitch. Purl, wrap, wrap, unwrap, purl, another knit weaving in the end, and as a bonus, now I don't have to weave in this end when I finish. Alright, that's probably enough, so I'll just do my 1x1 ribbing now. trim that off a little shorter just to get it out of the way. All right, I measured from the cast on edge, and my facing is the length listed in the pattern for the size 1, the size that I'm knitting. And now I am ready to work the mosaic setup round, I mean. So the first round with my contrast color. There it is. And here we're setting up the accent stitches. So those are the larger bands of stitches that go along the edge and separate the front and the back of the mitten. So slip 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, we slipped 3. Now knit 1 and slip 3. 1, 2, 3. And then knit 1, slip 1. Repeat, for me it's 4 more times. So I count 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. And then knit 1, 1, and repeat from the beginning of the instruction. Repeat from the asterisk. So slip 3, 1, 2, 3, knit 1. Make sure you keep that float pretty loose in the back. Every time you slip a stitch, it's making a float. So when you slip 3, it's making an even longer float. All right, I did slip 3, knit 1. Now slip 3 more. Knit 1, slip 1. And remember to keep an eye on that float too. In fact, I'm gonna move it so that my cable breaks, or whatever you wanna call those, are not interfering. So I'll show you how I move those in just a second. First, let's finish this instruction. So we did knit 1, slip 1, and now we're going to repeat that 4 more times. So 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and knit 1, and we ended up back at the beginning of round, which is exactly what we wanted. So I'll slip that, and now I switch to the larger needles because the facing is done. All right. Now our stitch pattern is set up, and we'll keep that really throughout the entire mitten. And we'll start with some knitting in pattern and purling in pattern, which means that, knitting in pattern and purling in pattern, which means that if you're knitting with the main color, you're gonna knit all of the main color stitches and slip all of the contrast color stitches. Same if you're purling, you would just purl the main color stitches and then slip the contrast color stitches, and vice versa for the contrast color. And if you look in the pattern after this paragraph, there's also some stitch counts listed where you can check that you got your back, front, and accent stitches all set up correctly. So now we have the folding round, which is the halfway point where this cuff will turn over. So everything here will end up on the inside of the cuff, and then the next round that we work is going to be the very edge of the mitten here. So round 1A is the main color, and we just knit in pattern to the beginning of round. So knit, knit, knit. Now I have a contrast color stitch, so slip that one. 3 main color stitches, knit, contrast, slip, main color, knit, contrast, slip, main color, knit. I'm gonna scooch those to the other side of the needle. Slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, and now we have 3 knits in a row. 2, 3, and slip. Three more knits in a row to finish out the accent stitches. Slip, knit, slip, knit, slip. I'll scooch those to the other side. Now this, I think, is the best way to have your needles set up for magic loop, because if you get your gaps in your needles really close to those accent stitches, it can make it difficult. So I have my beginning of round basically right in the middle of my front needle, and then the rest of the stitches, the other half of the stitches are on the back. All right, that's round 1A done. So round 1B, switch to the contrast color and purl in pattern to beginning of round. So slip 3, 1, 2, 3, and then purl. Slip 3 more. Purl. Paying attention to those floats. Slip, purl, slip. Purl, slip, purl, slip, purl, slip, purl, slip. Oops, oh no, I lost one. Fix that real quick. Okay, that's fixed. So slip 3, purl 1, slip 3. Purl, slip, purl, slip, purl. Slip, purl, slip, purl, slip, purl, and we're back at the beginning of round. So we're going to switch to the main color. And now we're on to the outside of the cuff. So round 1A is knit in pattern to beginning of round with the main color. And my tip for avoiding ladders when you reach the edges of your magic loop is to tighten the second stitch from the needle, but since we're working in this slip stitch pattern, it's actually going to be the 4th stitch from the needle, so the second worked stitch from the needle. So now that I'm here, I'm going to tighten up that stitch, and that's actually going to help avoid the ladder in the gap there. All right, that's round 1A done, so round 1B with the contrast color, also knit in pattern to beginning of round. All right, and now we're just going to repeat that, round 1A and 1B, until it measures the number listed in the pattern from the cast on edge, so that'll be the total length, and that'll basically be twice as long as we've worked right now, so that that purl row that we just worked will be right in the center for us to fold on. All right, my piece now measures the length written in the pattern from the cast on edge, and I'm ready to fold it in half. So a couple things I'm going to do first before I start to knit the cast on edge together with the live stitches I have currently. First, I'm going to take a darning needle, and because it is important that you keep the stitches you're knitting together with the cast on edge basically lined up, okay? So first I'm going to start at my very next stitch to work, and I'm going to use this needle just to draw a line straight down through the middle of all these stitches and then mark the first stitch that I want to start with. So I'm going to stick a stitch marker there. Then, if you feel confident about going every other from there, you can go right ahead. But what I'm going to do, just to make it a little bit more sure that I don't mess up, is pop a couple more stitch markers in both the top and the bottom that are equally spaced out, so that I can tell that I'm on track. So this first stitch marker that I put in, that corresponds to my beginning of round, and then I'm going to count 10 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And pop another stitch marker in between those two. Okay. All right, and then down here, these are actually pretty easy to see because of the ribbing, but basically that was my first stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That should be my 10th stitch right there. And then let's just do one more of those. Had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so those are going to help keep me on track, and the rest of the stitches, it's not that many more than 10, so I think I'll be okay. All right, so we're going to be working with the main color. Get the contrast color out of the way. And we're going to fold the facing up and in. Now you can see that purl row should be right on the edge. And that's how our cuff will look. All right, and we're going to knit in pattern, knitting every main color stitch together with a stitch from the cast on edge. So let me grab my first stitch here. I just put it on the needle like that. Take out the stitch marker. And knit those two together. And now for the accent stitches, I'm only going to knit every other main color stitch together with every other stitch from the cast on. So the main color stitch, the next main color stitch, I'll just knit that by itself. Now go down to the cast on edge so I can see where I grabbed that first one. Then I know that this in-between stitch is a purl. And then I'll grab this next knit and knit those two together. Slip. Once again, skip one, grab one, knit them together, knit that one, slipping one here, grabbing one, knit them together, slip one, here's the next one. I'll try to stay in frame. Alright, I've reached a marker and down here I have a marker as well. That's pretty good. Oh boy. And I am just going to tuck my yarn tails into that tube because I think they'll be pretty safe in there. Especially with this non-superwash wool, I think they'll just kind of cozy up in there and be just fine. Whoops. Forgot I had to slip one first. Now I'll go grab my stitch from the cast on edge. There it is. And I don't worry too much about how I'm grabbing these stitches, but I try to do it the same every time. Alright, now we've got our next marker here, and down in the facing we have a marker there as well. So we did alright keeping lined up. And in the end it's not going to matter if you're like one stitch off, but if you're more than a couple stitches off, you might just want to look and see if you can tell that your cuff is kind of swirling, because you really might be able to see that all of these lines are kind of going diagonal instead of straight up and down. Which actually sounds like a kind of cool thing to do on purpose. I wonder if anyone has tried that. Alright, we made it all the way around. starting to look pretty cute, I think. That's our cuff. And then next round is with the contrast color, knit in pattern to beginning of round. All right, we're back at the beginning of round, and the next part is to work eyelets that hold the I-cord ties. So you can omit this if you don't want to have those I-cord bows. You can just skip this row. But I'm going to add them because I think they're cute. So now size 1 is a little bit different from the rest of the sizes. But you can still see how the eyelets are made from size 1. It'll just be a slightly different number of eyelets, because the size 1 is so small that it only has 4 eyelets, but the rest of the sizes will have 8. So let's get started with the main color, knit accent stitches in pattern. So the accent stitches are these 7 stitches on the side. So it's going to be these first 3 main color, and then the slip one, and the next 3 main color. Those are your accent stitches. And yarn over, knit 2 together, knit in pattern to 2 stitches before the accent stitches. All right, there's 2 stitches left before my accent stitches. Now I'm going to SSK, so I like to slip 2 knitwise like that and then knit them together off of that needle. That's how I do my SSKs. And then yarn over, and then repeat from the star 1 more time. So knit accent stitches in pattern, yarn over, knit 2 together, knit 2 stitches before the accent stitches. Those accent stitches will also be the beginning of round. All right, so we have 2 stitches left before those next accent stitches. And we're going to slip, slip, knit, and then yarn over. All right, now for the contrast color, knit in pattern to yarn over, there's the yarn over, and then the yarn over we're gonna knit. And we don't want to twist the yarn over because we want it to leave a big eyelet for those cords to be threaded through. And then we'll repeat that again 3 more times. So knitting in pattern to the yarn over, knit yarn over, knit in pattern to yarn over, there it is, knit yarn over, and knit in pattern to the last yarn over, and the last yarn over, you do have to be careful not to lose it because it was right before the beginning of round, okay? So that is the yarn over. I'm going to knit that, hold it on my needle, slip that stitch, grab my main color yarn, and before it has the chance to get crazy on me, I'm just going to knit the first stitch of the next round. All right, so that's it for this section. You've got the cuff completely done and your eyelet row worked. So see me back here for the next section and we'll get started on the thumb gusset.